The moment Prince Harry stepped off the plane in Los Angeles, he probably thought he had left the storms of royal scrutiny behind. The palm trees, the glittering streets, the paparazzi that were somehow more predictable than the tabloids back home. It was supposed to be a fresh start. A place where his past mistakes, his drug admissions, and the shadows of his memoir could fade into the background. But as it turns out, paradise has a way of hiding the thorns beneath its surface. And in Harry's case, those thorns were about to pierce deeper than anyone could have imagined. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Could you ever imagine that a few pages in a memoir could jeopardize a man's right to live in a country? It sounds absurd. Harry, a prince, a global celebrity, an American resident with dreams and ambitions, threatened by the very system that promises freedom and opportunity. But that is exactly the situation unfolding right now. A legal storm has gathered over him, one that carries the potential to strip him of his U.S. residency, tarnish his reputation, and challenge the very image he has cultivated since leaving the royal family. At the heart of this storm is a conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, an organization often known for its influence in political and legal matters, but rarely in celebrity affairs. Yet here they are, laser-focused on Harry, determined to force the release of his immigration records. Why? Because in 2023, Harry admitted to recreational drug use in his memoir, Spare. On the surface, it may seem like a harmless confession, a private anecdote meant to humanize him in the eyes of the public. But in the intricate world of U.S. immigration law, those admissions carry weight, potentially more weight than Harry could have ever anticipated. And now, President Trump has entered the conversation. Yes, the former president, a figure who has never shied away from high-stakes battles or media storms, has reportedly reopened Harry's visa case. What does this mean for a man who has spent the last several years trying to establish a life outside the palace walls? Could it be that his American dream is about to collide with political realities in ways he never imagined? The implications stretch far beyond a legal skirmish. They touch on celebrity privilege, political influence, and a society that simultaneously idolizes and scrutinizes its stars. Think about it for a moment. A prince, raised in the gilded corridors of royalty, accustomed to security, protocol, and global attention, now faces the possibility of deportation because a group of American policymakers believes he might have received preferential treatment. His past, once confined to the private walls of palace bedrooms and personal diaries, is suddenly public property. Every word, every admission, every perceived misstep is dissected under a legal microscope. And Harry, the man who has fought relentlessly against the invasive gaze of the media, finds himself trapped in a narrative that he cannot control. Now, you might be wondering why now? Why this case? And why the sudden resurgence of attention after months, or even years, of relative calm? The answer lies in timing, political theater, and the relentless machinery of influence in Washington. For the Heritage Foundation, this is more than just a legal battle. It is a statement, a demonstration of the law's reach, and a challenge to the notion that celebrity status grants immunity from accountability. For Trump, reopening the case is a strategic move, one that aligns with his penchant for headline-grabbing actions, for positioning himself as a defender of laws he believes are often ignored or bypassed. Harry's memoir, Spare, is not merely a book. It is a trigger, a spark that ignited conversations, controversy, and, now, legal repercussions. Within its pages, he spoke openly about mistakes he made, battles he fought with addiction, and the darker corners of his life that the public rarely glimpsed. Those admissions, candid as they were, have become the focal point of a larger argument. Did Harry receive a visa he technically shouldn't have? Did the system bend in favor of a global celebrity, a prince, an American resident with influence and connections? And if so, should the law now intervene to correct that perceived injustice? The implications of this case reach far beyond Harry himself. Imagine the precedent this sets for other high-profile individuals seeking residence in the United States. The message is clear. Your past can catch up with you, no matter your fame, your wealth, or your connections. The walls of privilege that many assume exist around the elite may not be as impenetrable as once thought. For Harry, this is more than just a legal maneuver. It is a confrontation with reality, a stark reminder that the consequences of one's actions are never as distant as they might seem. But the story does not stop at legal arguments and political intrigue. It is also deeply human. Harry's struggle is the struggle of a man attempting to reconcile his past with his present, to navigate a world where privacy is a luxury and freedom is conditional. Every court filing, every media headline, every tweet and post about his situation chips away at the veneer of security he has worked so hard to build. The psychological weight of knowing that his residency could be revoked, that he could be forced to leave the country he now calls home, is enormous. And yet, he faces it publicly, under the relentless scrutiny of both supporters and critics. There is also an irony here that cannot be ignored. Harry left the United Kingdom seeking freedom, hoping to escape the pressures of royal life, the relentless paparazzi, and the suffocating expectations of monarchy. In doing so, he chose the United States, a nation that represents opportunity and new beginnings. And yet, in a cruel twist of fate, the very freedoms he sought are now under threat, jeopardized by admissions he made to be honest about his life, and by political forces far beyond his control. Imagine waking up one day, thinking you are secure, only to find the walls closing in around you. That is Harry's reality today. And while many of us may read about it with detached curiosity, the emotional stakes are enormous. For someone who has spent a lifetime in the public eye, where every mistake is magnified, this legal battle is not abstract. It is intimate. It is personal. It is a reckoning. And the world is watching, captivated by the drama, divided in opinion, and eager to see what happens next. The Heritage Foundation's actions, Trump's involvement, the media's relentless coverage, all of these elements combine to create a narrative that is equal parts legal thriller and royal exposé. The intrigue lies not just in the possibility of deportation, but in the way each layer of this story reveals the tension between privilege and accountability, between past and present, between celebrity and the law. It is a story that forces us to question our assumptions about justice, fairness, and the reach of power in a society that prizes fame as much as it scrutinizes it. And yet, even with all this context, there is still more lurking beneath the surface. What new revelations could emerge from Harry's immigration records? What secrets might the Heritage Foundation uncover that have never been disclosed? And how will Harry respond, not just legally, but emotionally, psychologically, and socially, to the mounting pressure? These are questions that hang in the air, unanswered, creating a tension that is almost unbearable. The audience is left asking, can Harry survive this storm, or is this truly the beginning of the end for his American chapter? By now, it should be clear that this is more than a simple legal case or a celebrity scandal. This is a collision of worlds, the royal and the political, the personal and the public, the American dream and harsh reality. And as the story unfolds, it will challenge everything Harry has built, forcing him to confront not just the law, but the consequences of his own life choices, the power of public perception, and the merciless machinery of political maneuvering. But what comes next is even more alarming, because in this high-stakes game, no one is safe and nothing is as it seems. Every new document, every political maneuver, every media headline has the potential to alter the trajectory of Harry's life in ways he cannot predict. And the final twist, the one that could truly define his future in America, is still waiting to be revealed. This is not just a story about a prince. It is a story about accountability, privilege, and the fine line between fame and scrutiny. And it is a story that the world cannot take its eyes off, because the next move could change everything. But what comes next will shock you, and no one saw it coming. The first thing to understand about Prince Harry's life in America is that, on the surface, it looked perfect. Palm trees swaying against the backdrop of a setting sun, luxury cars gliding down sun-drenched streets, and sprawling estates that seemed plucked from the pages of a magazine. From the outside, it was the life most people would envy, a life of freedom, autonomy, and the ability to escape the relentless pressures of royal protocol. Yet beneath this glittering facade, a storm was quietly brewing, one that could undermine everything Harry had worked to build. The story of Harry in the U.S. begins with a dream, the classic American dream. After stepping back from royal duties, Harry and Meghan Markle sought a life away from the cameras, tabloids, and palace intrigue. Los Angeles, with its sun, its Hollywood allure, and the promise of anonymity, seemed like the perfect escape. It was a city where fame was a common currency, where past mistakes could be glossed over, and where the rules, at least in the eyes of an outsider, seemed malleable. But the illusion of freedom is often just that, an illusion. Almost immediately, Harry discovered that even in America, freedom comes with invisible boundaries. Visa requirements, residency rules, and the intricate web of immigration law were waiting, silent but unforgiving, ready to ensnare him if he stepped wrong. It's easy to assume that a prince could navigate these hurdles effortlessly, that connections and influence would smooth over every obstacle. But the truth is far more complex. Harry's American dream was not just about luxury or autonomy. It was a negotiation with a system that does not bend easily for anyone, no matter how famous, how royal, or how compelling their story might be. The tension began subtly. Public appearances, media coverage, and casual mentions of Harry's past in interviews and social media posts began to attract attention from quarters he may have hoped to avoid. It wasn't the tabloids of London that caused him trouble. It was a more calculated, strategic scrutiny. Enter the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank that has spent decades influencing policy and law in Washington. They saw in Harry a perfect case study, a high-profile figure, a royal with international attention, who had publicly admitted to actions, drug use in this instance, that could legally affect his immigration status. Imagine it for a moment. A personal confession, something Harry likely considered private, transformed into a potential legal liability. The Heritage Foundation argued that Harry's past behavior should have disqualified him from receiving a U.S. visa, or at the very least, that he may have been given preferential treatment not afforded to ordinary applicants. It's a dramatic escalation, and one that underscores the fact that in the U.S., celebrity status can be both a shield and a target. The higher you rise, the harder the fall, especially when political and legal actors decide to turn their focus on you. And then came the twist that few could have predicted. President Trump, a figure already synonymous with controversy and headline-making decisions, reportedly decided to reopen Harry's visa case. Suddenly, a personal struggle had transformed into a public spectacle of international interest. Why would a former president involve himself in the immigration status of a British royal? Some speculate it's political theater, some believe it's a personal crusade, and others see it as a signal of America's unique intersection of celebrity, law, and influence. Whatever the reason, the involvement of Trump elevated the stakes exponentially. But Harry's challenges weren't purely legal or political, they were personal. The man who had once lived under the scrutinizing eyes of the British press now faced a different kind of pressure. In the U.S., scrutiny came with a mixture of fascination and judgment. Social media amplified every revelation, every rumor, every leaked document. Public opinion, volatile and instantaneous, began shaping the narrative in ways Harry could not control. Supporters and critics alike weighed in, dissecting every word of his memoir, every past action, and every current move. The result was a pressure cooker of expectation and judgment that few could endure. Even within his own circles, tension mounted. Friends, allies, and advisors faced the same dilemma: how to protect Harry while navigating a landscape rife with legal and political pitfalls. Strategic decisions had to be made daily: public statements, legal filings, media interactions, all designed to maintain appearances while safeguarding his rights. Every choice carried consequences, every misstep amplified by the media machine, and every action potentially used against him in the ongoing legal battle. Yet amid the pressure, there were moments that revealed the human side of Harry, the vulnerability behind the prince persona. In interviews, he occasionally spoke candidly about the weight of fame, the difficulty of maintaining privacy, and the guilt associated with leaving behind his family while trying to forge his own path. These glimpses into his inner world reminded the public that, despite the luxury and status, he was navigating the same fears, insecurities, and challenges that many face, but on a vastly magnified stage. Irony often colors the lives of those in the public eye. For Harry, The irony was stark. He left the United Kingdom to escape scrutiny and find freedom in America, only to encounter a situation where transparency, honesty, and even his memoir could threaten the very life he sought to create. The freedom he chased came with a hidden cost, a constant reminder that past actions, no matter how long ago, could resurface in ways that altered the trajectory of his life. And the stakes were growing. The Heritage Foundation, armed with legal expertise and public influence, had begun to methodically build their case, seeking documents, statements, and evidence that could substantiate their claims. Every revelation, no matter how small, could be leveraged to challenge Harry's residency. The legal strategy was meticulous, calculated, and relentless, leaving Harry and his team with little room for error. The involvement of Trump added a layer of unpredictability. His reputation for unorthodox decisions, headline-driven actions, and willingness to escalate conflicts created an environment where Harry's future could shift overnight. What might have been a manageable legal challenge in normal circumstances became a high-stakes drama, with political overtones, media frenzy, and public speculation intensifying every move. For viewers, this is more than just a celebrity scandal. It is a cautionary tale about fame, accountability, and the complex interplay between personal choices and public consequences. Every moment of Harry's American life, every admission in his memoir, and every media interaction became part of a larger narrative that transcended the individual and touched on broader societal questions. How do we treat privilege? What happens when fame intersects with the law? And how far can political influence reach in shaping outcomes for those who are perceived to be above the rules? The pressure was unrelenting. Every day brought new headlines, new social media debates, and new speculation about Harry's legal fate. Supporters rallied, critics scrutinized, and neutral observers watched, riveted by the unfolding drama. In a world where attention is currency, Harry found himself at the center of a maelstrom, caught between past mistakes and the unpredictable forces of law and politics. But the most alarming part of all was what came next. The Heritage Foundation, emboldened by Trump's involvement and public attention, was preparing a new phase of their campaign, one that could threaten not just Harry's residency, but his reputation, his security, and his ability to live freely in the country he had chosen as his new home. Every ally, every strategy, every carefully planned move would be tested against a relentless tide of legal and political pressure. Harry's American dream, it seemed, was on the brink. The luxury, the freedom, the autonomy, everything he had sought to claim in Los Angeles, was suddenly imperiled. The very choices he made to carve out a new life could now be used as evidence against him. And as the world watched, the question loomed larger than ever. Could a prince survive the very system that promised opportunity and justice, or was he about to face a reckoning that no royal training could prepare him for? The next phase of this saga promised revelations, confrontations, and unexpected twists. The foundation of Harry's American life, carefully constructed over years, was now under threat. And as legal documents moved through courts, media outlets amplified every development, and political figures inserted themselves into the drama, one truth became increasingly clear. This was no ordinary challenge. This was a test of influence, strategy, and resilience. A trial that could determine not just Harry's status in America, but the very narrative of his post-royal life. And yet, even as the storm gathered, Harry's story remained incomplete. Secrets had yet to surface, legal maneuvers were still unfolding, and the public was about to witness events that could redefine everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The Heritage Foundation is not the kind of organization that typically finds itself at the center of celebrity drama. It is a conservative think tank with decades of influence in Washington, shaping policy, drafting legislation, and advising political leaders on issues ranging from economics to national security. Rarely does it engage with the world of royals, memoirs, or Hollywood lifestyles. Yet somehow, Prince Harry, an international figure, a former royal, and a best-selling author, became its latest target. And the consequences of that focus would ripple far beyond what Harry could have imagined. It all began with a simple premise. If Harry had admitted to past drug use in his memoir, could he legally have received a U.S. visa? On the surface, it might sound like nitpicking or political posturing. After all, Harry is a celebrity, a public figure, someone whose life is scrutinized to an extraordinary degree. Why should a few lines in a book threaten his residency in America? But the Heritage Foundation saw this as more than a moral question. They viewed it as a legal one. The U.S. immigration system is governed by rules that apply, in theory, equally to everyone. And they argued that Harry may have received preferential treatment, a privilege that ordinary applicants would never enjoy. Consider the implications. Every immigrant who has ever sought a visa in the U.S. must answer detailed questions about past behavior, including drug use, criminal history, and other potentially disqualifying actions. The Heritage Foundation argued that Harry's public admissions could have disqualified him, and they wanted the records to prove whether he had received special treatment. For them, this was a matter of principle, of accountability, and of demonstrating that no one, royalty or otherwise, is above the law. The legal battle began quietly but methodically. The Heritage Foundation filed motions requesting the release of Harry's immigration records, arguing that the public had a right to know whether the prince had followed the same rules as everyone else. In their view, transparency was not merely desirable, it was essential. The case raised provocative questions. Had Harry disclosed his past drug use fully? Were exceptions made in his favor? Could a prince truly navigate the U.S. immigration system without being subject to the same scrutiny as any other applicant? What made this case particularly explosive was the meticulous way the Heritage Foundation framed its argument. They did not rely on gossip, tabloid claims, or hearsay. Instead, they approached the situation like a seasoned legal team, building a case that highlighted facts, documents, and precedent. By focusing on tangible evidence, they transformed what might have been a fleeting celebrity story into a legal battle with national significance. It is also important to understand the strategic brilliance behind their timing. Harry's memoir, Spare, had been on the market for months, already fueling global debate. Public opinion was split. Some sympathized with his struggles, others criticized his admissions, and still others were curious about the legal consequences that might arise. By initiating the case at this moment, the Heritage Foundation ensured maximum media attention, ensuring that every court filing, every argument, and every new revelation would be amplified by global news outlets. But this was not just about attention. It was about setting a precedent. By targeting someone as high-profile as Harry, the Heritage Foundation sent a message to the public. The law applies to everyone. Fame, fortune, and title do not grant immunity. In a country where celebrity is often conflated with power, this was a bold, almost provocative stance. It was designed to capture the imagination of the public, ignite debate, and put pressure on both the courts and the individual at the center of the storm. The first steps in the legal process were deliberate and calculated. Requests for Harry's records were filed under the principle of transparency, citing specific laws that allowed for public access to certain immigration documents. The think tank argued that the public had a legitimate interest in knowing whether a high-profile individual had bypassed rules that others must follow. Their filings were precise, citing past cases, legal precedents, and statutory language, leaving little room for dismissal on technical grounds. Harry and his legal team were suddenly forced to confront a reality they may have hoped to avoid. The public could see details of his immigration history, personal admissions, and potential discrepancies. What had once been private was now at risk of becoming public record. The stakes were enormous. For Harry, the case represented not just a potential legal defeat, but a challenge to his carefully constructed image in America, a man attempting to forge a new identity outside the royal spotlight. The media, as expected, pounced on the story. Headlines began to appear in outlets ranging from tabloids to respected newspapers, each emphasizing the tension between privilege and accountability. Social media erupted with speculation, memes, and debates over whether a prince should be treated like any other applicant. Supporters rallied behind Harry, arguing that targeting him was unfair and excessive. Critics argued that fame should never shield someone from the law. The Heritage Foundation, meanwhile, remained resolute, presenting itself as a champion of principle rather than a political or celebrity targeting organization. But perhaps the most significant element of the Heritage Foundation strategy was its patience. They did not seek to escalate the case publicly at every stage. Instead, they allowed the legal process to unfold methodically, ensuring that each step, every motion, every request, every document obtained, would build momentum. The slow burn of the case ensured continuous public attention, with each new development feeding the curiosity of audiences worldwide. Adding to the complexity, the political climate in the United States amplified the stakes. Trump's involvement, though initially subtle, suggested that Harry's case had transcended a standard legal dispute. With a former president reportedly reopening the investigation into his visa, the pressure on Harry intensified. The Heritage Foundation's actions were no longer just legal maneuvers. They were part of a larger political narrative, one where fame, law, and power intersected in unpredictable ways. For Harry, the impact was immediate. Legal consultations, strategy sessions, and media management became daily necessities. Every public appearance, interview, and social media post had to be scrutinized for potential repercussions. The irony of his situation was palpable. He had left one high-pressure environment in search of freedom, only to find himself navigating an equally unforgiving landscape in America, where the rules were different but the stakes no less severe. There was also an emotional dimension to consider. The Heritage Foundation's actions were not just bureaucratic or procedural, they were deeply personal in their consequences. Each motion filed, each request for documentation, represented a potential exposure of private struggles and past mistakes. Harry, who had long fought to maintain control over his narrative, now faced a situation where others dictated the terms of disclosure. Privacy, a concept he had valued intensely, was being stripped away piece by piece. Despite the pressure, there were moments of strategy and counteraction. Harry's legal team responded with their own filings, motions to limit disclosure, and public statements aimed at framing the narrative favorably. But the Heritage Foundation's persistence created an environment of uncertainty, where each day brought new questions, new threats, and new speculation. For a public figure already accustomed to scrutiny, the intensity of this case was unlike anything he had encountered before. Public perception, too, became a battlefield. Supporters emphasized Harry's openness, his struggles, and his efforts to live a life of transparency and authenticity. Critics framed the case as evidence of privilege and potential lawbreaking. The Heritage Foundation's meticulous approach ensured that each side of the argument had a foundation, leaving the public to debate and interpret the evidence as it emerged. And all the while, the question lingered: what could possibly come next? The Heritage Foundation's methodical approach suggested that the revelations were far from over. The documents they sought, the motions they filed, and the legal strategy they pursued indicated that each new disclosure could carry implications far beyond what Harry had prepared for. Every piece of evidence, every statement, every legal interpretation had the potential to shift the narrative dramatically. Harry's American dream, carefully constructed over years of effort, now seemed precarious. The luxury, the autonomy, the freedom he had sought in Los Angeles were overshadowed by a relentless legal campaign. And the truth, the reality of whether he had received preferential treatment or simply navigated the system like any other applicant, remained to be revealed. The tension was palpable, the stakes monumental, and the outcome uncertain. But just as Harry braced for what seemed like an insurmountable challenge, another twist loomed on the horizon. The Heritage Foundation, far from concluding their efforts, was preparing the next phase of their campaign. And with President Trump reportedly involved, the stakes escalated to levels Harry had never faced before. Every ally, every strategy, every carefully planned move would soon be tested in ways that could redefine not just his legal status, but the very life he had built in America. The storm was gathering, and the prince who had sought refuge in the U.S. was now at the eye of a hurricane. The next development promised revelations, confrontations, and consequences that could change everything. And as the legal, political, and public forces converged, one truth became undeniable. This was no ordinary challenge. This was a reckoning. But what came next would be more shocking than anyone could have predicted, and the world was about to watch it unfold. It was a confession that seemed harmless at the time. An admission buried in a memoir meant to tell a personal story, a moment of candor in a life otherwise lived under scrutiny. In Spare, Prince Harry wrote openly about his past recreational drug use. To many readers, it was simply an honest reflection, a humanizing detail that made a prince more relatable to the public. But what Harry likely did not anticipate was the legal hammer that those words would summon. In the United States, immigration law does not forgive or overlook drug admissions lightly. And now, those lines in a book were at the center of a storm that could threaten his very right to remain in the country. The U.S. immigration system has clear guidelines when it comes to drug use. Certain admissions, even years old, can render an applicant inadmissible. Recreational use of controlled substances is taken seriously, with no special exceptions for fame, royalty, or global recognition. What matters, in the eyes of immigration law, is the act itself and whether it was disclosed accurately and honestly during the visa application process. For Harry, whose memoir openly chronicled his experiences, the Heritage Foundation seized on these admissions as a potential legal foothold. But the situation is far more nuanced than a simple yes or no question. The interpretation of immigration law is complex, with room for discretion, exceptions, and precedent. The Heritage Foundation argued that Harry's candidness should have disqualified him, or at the very least, triggered a more thorough vetting process. They questioned whether the visa system had been applied fairly or whether Harry, by virtue of his status and connections, had received preferential treatment. It is a provocative claim, one designed not only to challenge Harry's legal standing, but to ignite public debate about the intersection of privilege and law. Imagine the stakes for a moment. Every word Harry had written, every detail of his past disclosed in the memoir, could now be scrutinized under the lens of legality. What may have seemed like an innocent anecdote, smoking a joint, experimenting in youth, making mistakes that millions of others have made, suddenly became a potential legal liability. The irony is striking. A prince, shielded by privilege for most of his life, is now facing consequences for transparency, a quality usually lauded as admirable. Harry's legal team, of course, understood the peril. They knew that the public admission of drug use was, in the U.S. context, a double-edged sword. On one hand, honesty could work in his favor, demonstrating transparency and integrity. On the other, it exposed him to claims that he had violated immigration laws. Every public statement, every court filing, had to navigate this delicate balance. A single misstep could be amplified in the court of public opinion and the court of law alike. The Heritage Foundation capitalized on the tension. They meticulously cited the sections of immigration law relevant to drug use, drawing connections between Harry's admissions and the legal criteria for admissibility. Their argument was precise, almost surgical. A prince who publicly confessed to illegal drug use could face revocation of his visa, not because of fame or status, but because the law does not bend for royalty. Each motion they filed, each document they referenced, built a narrative of accountability that the public found irresistible. This wasn't just a technical legal argument. It was a narrative charged with drama and irony. Here was a man who had grown up surrounded by privilege, who had stepped back from royal life seeking freedom, and who now faced the possibility of being uprooted from the country he had chosen to call home, all because of past mistakes he had the courage to admit. The tension was palpable, and the stakes could not have been higher. Media coverage amplified the gravity of the situation. Headlines across the globe emphasized the potential consequences. Prince Harry's past could cost him U.S. residency. Royal drug confession sparks legal battle. Could a prince be deported over a memoir? Social media, of course, exploded. Supporters argued that Harry's honesty should be celebrated, not punished. Critics insisted that fame does not grant immunity from the law. The result was a public spectacle. A global debate played out in news feeds, discussion forums, and nightly talk shows. Every angle was dissected, every possibility analyzed, and every potential outcome debated. But the legal implications ran deeper than public opinion. The Heritage Foundation sought access to Harry's visa application records, aiming to determine whether he had disclosed his drug use appropriately. In their view, the question was straightforward. Had the law been applied consistently, or had Harry received preferential treatment? If the latter were true, it could have wide-reaching implications, not just for Harry but for the perception of fairness in the immigration system. For someone who had spent his life navigating the spotlight, this was a threat that was both personal and systemic. Harry's admission in Spare was, in many ways, a courageous act. He had been honest about his past, candid about his mistakes, and willing to confront uncomfortable truths about his own behavior. Yet courage, as this case demonstrates, does not always protect one from consequences. The Heritage Foundation's legal strategy hinged precisely on the tension between honesty and accountability, arguing that even a public confession cannot exempt a high-profile individual from scrutiny under the law. Within the walls of Harry's legal team, strategy meetings were tense. Every public statement, every interview, every social media post had to be scrutinized for potential risk. Lawyers debated how to frame his past in a way that acknowledged mistakes without giving opponents leverage. Consultants worked to control the narrative in the media, balancing the need for transparency with the imperative of legal defense. It was a careful dance, one misstep away from amplifying the very danger they sought to mitigate. The stakes were further heightened by the political climate. Trump's reported involvement added a layer of unpredictability. The former president had a history of taking bold, headline-grabbing actions, and his interest in Harry's case suggested that the stakes had shifted from a purely legal battle to a matter of political theater. Every motion filed, every document released, every statement made by Trump or his allies could influence public perception, media coverage, and the legal trajectory of the case. And yet, there were contradictions at every turn. On one hand, Harry's honesty could be framed as admirable, a mark of integrity in a world often dominated by secrecy and deception. On the other hand, the same honesty provided ammunition for legal arguments, a basis to challenge his admissibility and question whether he had followed the same rules as any other applicant. This paradox, the collision of virtue and vulnerability, became a central theme in the unfolding drama, one that captivated audiences worldwide. The emotional impact on Harry was undeniable. For a man accustomed to controlling his narrative, the idea that his own words could threaten his residency was unsettling. Every headline, every social media post, every legal filing carried weight. Privacy, a luxury he had once hoped to enjoy in America, was now largely unattainable. The psychological strain of knowing that a past he had acknowledged in good faith could be weaponized against him was immense, and the public watched as he navigated this delicate and high-pressure landscape. Legal experts weighed in, offering opinions on the potential outcomes. Some argued that a past admission, particularly one disclosed voluntarily in a memoir, should not be sufficient grounds for deportation. Others noted that U.S. immigration law is notoriously strict when it comes to drug use, and that the Heritage Foundation's argument could carry weight if it revealed inconsistencies in Harry's visa application. The analysis varied, but one thing was clear. The implications were serious, and the uncertainty was as dramatic as any headline could capture. In the middle of this maelstrom, Harry continued to live his life publicly, attending events, engaging with charitable organizations, and managing his business ventures. Yet the tension was always present, a shadow over even his most mundane activities. Every decision had to be weighed against the potential for legal repercussions, every public engagement carefully calibrated to avoid creating vulnerabilities. The intersection of fame, law, and personal history created a high-wire act that few could navigate successfully. And then came the moment that would shift the narrative yet again. New filings, new motions, and potential evidence emerged, signaling that the Heritage Foundation's efforts were far from over. The possibility that Harry could face formal challenges to his visa status was no longer theoretical. It was real, immediate, and escalating. For the first time, the dream of a peaceful, autonomous life in America seemed increasingly precarious, threatened by a combination of past actions, political influence, and relentless legal scrutiny. The irony is almost unbearable. Harry had left one world of scrutiny for another, believing that distance and fame might provide freedom. Instead, he found himself ensnared in a system where every word, every confession, and every past choice could be used against him. What was meant to be a new chapter in his life had become a battle for legitimacy, fairness, and security, a struggle that would define his public persona and private existence in equal measure. The next stage of the case promised even greater revelations, with documents potentially exposing more details about Harry's past, with Trump's reported involvement raising stakes even higher, and with the Heritage Foundation prepared to pursue their strategy relentlessly. The drama was far from over. The question was no longer just about past drug use. It was about the broader implications for Harry's residency, reputation, and ability to continue the life he had chosen in America. Every observer, from legal experts to fans, knew one thing. This was a story that would not end quietly. The tension between past actions, public confession, and legal consequence created a narrative so compelling that the world could not look away. And as the Heritage Foundation prepared their next moves, Harry faced the sobering reality that a memoir meant to tell his story could also become the instrument of his greatest challenge yet. But what came next would push the boundaries of expectation even further, and the outcome could change everything Harry had built in America. In the world of high-stakes legal drama, few battles are as intricate or as merciless as the one Prince Harry now found himself embroiled in. The Heritage Foundation had already cast a long shadow over his life in America, and with Trump's involvement, the stakes had escalated to a level few could have predicted. This was no longer simply about a visa or a few lines in a memoir. It was a legal battlefield where every word, every document, and every nuance could become ammunition. For Harry, navigating this arena required more than celebrity charm. It demanded strategy, precision, and resilience under pressure. The battlefield itself was complex. Immigration law in the United States is notoriously technical, a labyrinth of statutes, regulations, and discretionary powers. At the center of Harry's case were admissions in his memoir regarding past recreational drug use, statements that the Heritage Foundation argued could render him inadmissible. The legal argument was deceptively simple. If Harry disclosed drug use in a public forum, did he comply with the requirements of his visa application? And if not, had he been afforded special treatment that ordinary applicants would never receive? But legal battles are rarely about simplicity. Every motion filed by the Heritage Foundation, every request for records, every citation of precedent, was designed to create pressure, shape perception, and force Harry's legal team into reactive strategies. The legal terrain was fraught with ambiguity. Courts can interpret the law differently, bureaucrats have discretion, and legal precedent often hinges on minute distinctions. For Harry, every detail mattered. Even a single phrase, misinterpreted or taken out of context, could tip the scales against him. The Heritage Foundation was relentless. They filed motions requesting disclosure of Harry's immigration records, pushing for transparency and accountability. Each filing was precise, citing statutes, prior cases, and legal standards that could support their claims. Their objective was clear: to establish a record demonstrating either preferential treatment or procedural irregularities. In their eyes, this was not just a legal pursuit. It was a moral and civic imperative, a test of the system's fairness and integrity. Meanwhile, Harry's legal team worked tirelessly to counter each move. Their challenge was enormous. Not only did they have to protect their client's residency status, but they also had to safeguard sensitive personal information from becoming public. Every filing, every objection, and every strategic maneuver was designed to control exposure while preserving the possibility of a favorable outcome. The pressure was unrelenting, the stakes monumental, and the room for error almost non-existent. The courtroom itself became a theater of high tension. Legal arguments were dense, full of technical jargon, references to statutes, and historical precedent. Yet behind the formalities was a story that captivated the public. A prince, once shielded by royalty, now facing scrutiny from the American legal system. The contrast was striking. Harry's life, previously defined by privilege and ceremonial protocol, was now subject to the same legal processes as any ordinary applicant, at least in theory. Each hearing brought new layers of complexity. Witnesses could be called, documents scrutinized, and evidence interpreted in ways that could shift public perception. The Heritage Foundation had made clear that they intended to use every tool at their disposal. Their filings emphasized not only legal compliance, but also ethical accountability, framing Harry's situation as a case study in privilege, transparency, and the rule of law. Media coverage intensified with every procedural development. Headlines splashed dramatic interpretations of court filings, leaked documents, and statements from legal experts. Social media became a battlefield in its own right, where supporters and critics debated every nuance. Public opinion, unpredictable and amplified, added an additional layer of pressure. Every legal victory could be overshadowed by public skepticism, and every setback magnified in the court of public perception. For Harry, the emotional toll was significant. The constant scrutiny, the high-stakes environment, and the uncertainty of outcomes weighed heavily. Legal strategy demanded focus, but the personal impact was unavoidable. Privacy was a luxury lost. Every past choice, every public statement, every personal anecdote was fair game for legal scrutiny and public debate. Navigating this dual reality, managing both legal defenses and personal well-being, became a daily challenge. The complexity was further amplified by Trump's reported involvement. As a political figure with significant media influence, his interest in the case created a scenario in which legal proceedings and public narratives were intertwined. Actions taken in court could have political ramifications, and political maneuvers could impact public perception and, indirectly, legal strategy. The result was a multidimensional battlefield where law, media, and politics collided. One particularly tense moment came when new evidence was reportedly submitted, potentially expanding the scope of the Heritage Foundation's claims. The legal team had to prepare responses, anticipate counterarguments, and strategize next steps, all while under intense public scrutiny. Each document, each filing, and each motion could alter the trajectory of the case, and the margin for miscalculation was razor-thin. The Heritage Foundation's strategy was methodical. They were not seeking sensationalism. They were pursuing a calculated, step-by-step approach designed to build momentum. Each filing added pressure, each disclosure raised stakes, and each legal argument intensified scrutiny. By approaching the case with patience and precision, they created a scenario in which Harry had to respond consistently, strategically, and under constant observation. The legal battlefield was as much about perception as it was about law. Every victory, every objection, and every filing was a signal to the public, the courts, and political observers. Success or failure was not only measured in legal terms, but in how it influenced narrative, reputation, and momentum. For Harry, maintaining equilibrium required deft navigation, strategic thinking, and a clear understanding of both legal and media dynamics. Yet even in the midst of this complexity, contradictions emerged. On one hand, Harry's past admissions could be framed as transparency and accountability, qualities typically praised in public figures. On the other, those same admissions provided the Heritage Foundation with legal leverage. The duality of virtue and vulnerability created tension, making the legal battlefield unpredictable and emotionally taxing. And all the while, the stakes continued to rise. Each court date, each filing, and each strategic move had the potential to redefine Harry's life in America. The luxury, autonomy, and freedom he had sought were now contingent on navigating a multi-layered legal and political environment. What had begun as a personal choice, to write a memoir, to live openly in the U.S., had escalated into a complex, high-stakes conflict with far-reaching consequences. The legal battlefield was only intensifying, and the next phase promised to push Harry further into uncertainty. The Heritage Foundation had already demonstrated persistence and strategic precision, and with Trump's reported involvement, the landscape had become more volatile than ever. Every move, every decision, and every disclosure could alter the outcome in ways that were impossible to predict. And as the world watched, one reality became clear. In this arena, fame, privilege, and royal status offered no guarantees. Every choice carried weight, every action could be scrutinized, and the path forward was fraught with uncertainty. The next revelation, the next court filing, the next political maneuver, any of them, could change everything. But what came next would shock even those following the story closely, revealing twists that no one saw coming and pushing Harry's American dream to the brink. The court of public opinion has a power unlike any legal system. It can elevate heroes, destroy reputations, and transform private struggles into global spectacles. For Prince Harry, The unfolding visa saga was no longer just a legal challenge. It had become a referendum on his character, his choices, and even his very right to exist in America. Headlines and social media debates swirled around him, amplifying every nuance of the case. What started as a legal matter had grown into a cultural flashpoint, a drama played out in news feeds, opinion columns, podcasts, and late-night television. At first, many sympathized with Harry. He was the underdog, a prince who had left the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace for the promise of a normal life in the U.S. Audiences admired his candidness and spare, seeing the memoir as a brave act of honesty and vulnerability. To millions, Harry's story seemed emblematic of the human struggle to reconcile past mistakes with present ambitions. His admissions of past drug use were seen as a sign of authenticity, an acknowledgement of the mistakes anyone might make while growing up. But as the Heritage Foundation's legal actions progressed and Trump's reported involvement came into play, public sentiment began to shift. The narrative that Harry might have received preferential treatment, a royal exception in the eyes of American law, resonated with many. Critics argued that no one should be above the rules, and they framed the prince's situation as a story of entitlement and privilege. Headlines became sharper. Royal rules or American law? Did Prince Harry cheat the system? The prince who thought rules don't apply to him. Social media lit up with debate, memes, and threads dissecting every detail of his memoir and immigration filings. The shift in public opinion was amplified by a phenomenon unique to our digital age: virality. Every new development, every leaked filing, every statement from Trump or the Heritage Foundation sparked an online frenzy. News outlets raced to cover the latest twist, bloggers dissected minutiae, and social media commentators offered instant, often brutal, judgments. In this environment, perception became nearly as important as fact. Every public post, every interview, every casual remark carried potential consequences, influencing how the world perceived Harry's integrity, his eligibility, and even his right to remain in America. One key driver of this shift was framing. The Heritage Foundation and some media outlets portrayed Harry not simply as a man navigating U.S. immigration law, but as a symbol of privilege and special treatment. The narrative suggested that fame and royalty could, in theory, bend rules for him, something most ordinary applicants could never hope for. It was a powerful story: the prince versus the system, fame versus fairness, celebrity versus citizenship. And in the polarized climate of public discourse, these narratives were amplified and reinforced across platforms, creating a feedback loop that intensified scrutiny and pressure. At the same time, supporters tried to reframe the conversation. They emphasized Harry's honesty, his willingness to confront personal challenges, and his charitable efforts. Campaigns were launched to rally public sympathy, highlight the unfairness of excessive scrutiny, and emphasize the irony of punishing someone for transparency. But competing narratives made it difficult for Harry to control the story fully. Every effort to sway opinion was met with counterarguments, skepticism, and fresh speculation, creating a volatile, unpredictable media ecosystem. Social media, in particular, became a battlefield. Fans created hashtags like #StandWithHarry and #FreeThePrince, sharing messages of support, while detractors circulated #RoyalPrivilege and #NoOneAboveTheLaw, questioning his actions and decisions. Memes exaggerated every aspect of the story, some humorous, some biting, some vicious. Public commentary became a mixture of outrage, analysis, satire, and speculation. The prince's private struggles were now a matter of global discussion, dissected in real time, with consequences that extended far beyond the courtroom. The impact on Harry was profound. Unlike a standard legal case, where arguments are confined to judges, lawyers, and paperwork, this battle unfolded on a stage of relentless public attention. Every legal maneuver was watched, every response analyzed, every misstep magnified. The pressure was constant, unrelenting, and psychologically taxing. For someone who had sought refuge in America to escape scrutiny, the reality could not have been more ironic. Freedom in the U.S. had come with an unprecedented level of exposure. Even within his own circle, opinions varied. Advisors debated strategy, weighing the potential benefits of transparency against the risks of exposure. Media consultants tried to shape narratives, focusing on sympathetic angles while mitigating vulnerabilities. Legal teams worked around the clock to anticipate both procedural challenges and public reaction. It was a constant balancing act, a high-wire performance where miscalculations could lead to reputational damage, legal setbacks, or both. The stakes were further heightened by Trump's involvement. His ability to influence media coverage, political conversation, and public perception created a scenario in which the Heritage Foundation's legal arguments were amplified by the weight of a political figure. This elevated the situation beyond standard legal proceedings into a cultural and political spectacle. Harry was now navigating a battlefield where law, politics, and public opinion intersected in unpredictable ways. Irony continued to pervade the narrative. Harry had left one world of intense scrutiny, the British royal spotlight, for another, believing that fame and distance might provide freedom. Yet here he was, under the intense gaze of global media, political actors, and the court of public opinion. Every public interaction, past or present, could be scrutinized, questioned, and reframed. The memoir that had once been an expression of personal truth had become both a vulnerability and a focal point for global discussion. Compounding the challenge were contradictions in public perception. Some admired his honesty, his courage, and his resilience. Others criticized him for entitlement, carelessness, or privilege. The tension between admiration and criticism created a volatile environment where Harry's every action carried amplified significance. Small gestures, minor statements, and even silence were interpreted, debated, and politicized. The Heritage Foundation's calculated approach ensured the story remained in the public eye. By strategically releasing filings, emphasizing specific legal arguments, and highlighting potential discrepancies in Harry's visa application, they kept the media and public engaged. Every action added layers of intrigue, intensified scrutiny, and increased the stakes. The narrative was no longer just about legality. It was about fairness, accountability, and the perception of justice in a world obsessed with celebrity. For Harry, navigating this environment required resilience. He had to maintain composure in the face of relentless attention, craft carefully measured statements, and rely on trusted advisors to anticipate new twists. At the same time, he had to balance legal strategy with personal well-being, recognizing that public perception could influence not only his reputation, but potentially the outcome of the legal proceedings themselves. As the debate intensified, the global audience remained captivated. Millions watched, read, and discussed every development, from court filings to tweets. Each revelation sparked speculation about what might come next, what risks remained, and how Harry would respond. The narrative had grown beyond a personal story into a cultural phenomenon, reflecting deep questions about privilege, accountability, and the intersection of fame and law. And yet, even as public opinion turned and media coverage reached a fever pitch, the most shocking developments had not yet surfaced. The documents, filings, and revelations that would truly alter the course of Harry's American life were still ahead, waiting to unfold in ways that no one could predict. The tension was palpable, the stakes higher than ever, and the prince's fate in America hung in the balance. But what came next would push public perception and the drama surrounding Harry into uncharted territory, revealing secrets, consequences, and twists that would shock even his most devoted supporters. While the world outside debated, speculated, and sensationalized, inside Harry's legal team, a very different story was unfolding. The public saw headlines, social media storms, and political theater. What they did not see was the painstaking strategy, the late-night consultations, and the sleepless nights spent preparing defenses for a battle that had grown exponentially beyond ordinary legal norms. This was not just a fight over a visa. It was a fight for Harry's life in America, and every decision mattered. The team, composed of immigration lawyers, media consultants, and crisis strategists, worked in a highly coordinated fashion. They understood that every filing from the Heritage Foundation, every statement by Trump, and every leaked document could have cascading consequences. Their goal was twofold: protect Harry legally and protect him publicly. Achieving this required a delicate balance. Too aggressive a legal stance risked inflaming public opinion. Too cautious an approach could be interpreted as weakness, emboldening opponents. Every step required precision. The first priority was the legal filings themselves. Harry's attorneys combed through every detail of the Heritage Foundation's motions, analyzing language, citations, and implications. They scrutinized every reference to U.S. immigration law, past case rulings, and procedural precedent. Their objective was clear: identify weaknesses, challenge assumptions, and prepare counters that would withstand both legal scrutiny and public interpretation. Every motion was drafted with an awareness that the world was watching, that leaks could occur, and that each sentence could be dissected on social media within hours. At the same time, the team had to anticipate Trump's involvement. Unlike typical legal opponents, Trump's interventions were unpredictable. Public statements could shift the narrative overnight. Media attention could spike without warning, and political actors could suddenly enter the fray. Harry's team needed contingency plans for every scenario, from additional filings and subpoenas to coordinated media responses and public messaging strategies. It was a level of preparation that required not only legal expertise, but also political and media acumen. Meetings often stretched late into the night. Lawyers debated strategy, weighing risk versus reward, while communications consultants prepared messaging that could preempt criticism or frame developments favorably. Every document, every press release, and every public statement was scrutinized for potential impact. In one session, a single paragraph of a proposed motion sparked hours of discussion. Was it legally sound? Could it be interpreted unfavorably by the press? Could it inadvertently give opponents leverage? Every angle had to be considered, every outcome anticipated.